What if everything we thought we knew about Dwight's exile to Tulsa was a lie? What if behind his sudden move, there was a deeper plan, one that ties back not only to Vince, but also to the hidden cousin from the Bevilaqua family? Season 3 promises to uncover dangerous secrets, and today, we're going to break down how Vince's shadowy connections and the mysterious reason Dwight was pushed to Tulsa may change the entire story. Before we can understand why Dwight was sent to Tulsa, we need to look at where he stood in the criminal world before the exile. Dwight was never just another soldier in the mob. He was old school, respected, and feared. He carried the code of silence and loyalty that many of the younger generation in New York had already forgotten. But respect comes with a price, and in Dwight's case, his loyalty to the family turned into a burden that others wanted to exploit. For years, Dwight had been a key player in the New York crime family, someone who could get things done without hesitation. He was tough, smart, and carried the kind of reputation that made bosses nervous. Men like Vince, who were more concerned about power than honor, saw Dwight as a threat. Vince's ambition was simple: rise higher in the ranks, secure more territory, and eventually have the bosses in his pocket. But standing in the way of that ambition was Dwight, a man who could outthink and outfight him any day. The mob is not only about loyalty, it's about politics. Dwight may have been respected, but his influence also made him a target. Behind closed doors, whispers started. Was Dwight too old school to adapt to the new ways of making money? Could he be manipulated into stepping aside? Vince used those whispers like a weapon, pushing the idea that Dwight had already had his time, and that the future belonged to a younger generation who was ready to play dirtier and faster. But there was one problem: Dwight's reputation. Sending him away or sidelining him wouldn't be easy. If done carelessly, it could spark division inside the family. No one wanted a direct war with Dwight, but they couldn't allow him to stand in the middle of their plans. So the bosses came up with a solution that looked like punishment, but in reality, it was strategy. They exiled him to Tulsa, a place far from New York, where Dwight could neither influence the family's politics nor challenge Vince's climb to power. On the surface, it was painted as a punishment for Dwight's actions, but beneath it all, it was a chess move designed to clear the path for others. In many ways, Tulsa was supposed to be a cage, a place where Dwight would fade away, his power reduced, his name slowly forgotten in New York circles. But what the bosses didn't expect was Dwight's resilience. Instead of treating Tulsa like a graveyard for his career, Dwight saw it as a blank canvas. He started building a new empire, gathering loyal allies, and proving once again why he was not just another mobster to be cast aside. And here's where Vince's role becomes more important. Because Vince didn't just want Dwight out of the picture, he wanted him completely removed from the game. Vince knew that as long as Dwight breathed, there was always a chance he could return to New York and reclaim his influence. That fear fueled his next moves and eventually connected him to someone who could give him the edge he needed: the Bevilaqua cousin. If Dwight was the old lion of the family, then Vince was the hungry wolf waiting for his chance. From the very beginning, Vince showed signs that he wasn't satisfied with being just another player in the mob. He wanted more control, more respect, and most importantly, more power. But unlike Dwight, Vince didn't earn loyalty through honor or old-school values. He used manipulation, backroom deals, and family connections to build his path upward. Vince watched Dwight closely, almost like a predator studying its prey. He noticed how Dwight commanded respect simply by walking into a room, how his reputation alone could silence arguments, and how his old-fashioned code of loyalty still inspired fear. To Vince, this wasn't admiration, it was a challenge. He wanted that same power, but he didn't want to wait decades to earn it. He wanted to cut the line. And to do that, he needed Dwight out of the way. The first move Vince made was subtle. He whispered into the ears of the bosses, hinting that Dwight was out of touch with the modern world of crime. The mob wasn't just about extortion and protection rackets anymore, it was about drugs, cyber schemes, and international connections. Vince painted Dwight as an outdated figure, a man living in the past, clinging to traditions that no longer made the family money. Slowly, he planted the idea that Dwight's presence was holding them back from bigger profits. But Vince didn't stop there. He began building his own network, both inside and outside the family. He made quiet promises to soldiers who felt overlooked, gave favors to men who were desperate for recognition, and even started making alliances with people the bosses normally wouldn't trust. To many, it looked like Vince was just being ambitious, but in reality, he was laying the foundation of his own power base. And then came the family connection that changed everything. Vince had ties to the Bevilaquas, a family known for their ruthlessness and their deep roots in mob history. On the surface, it seemed like a distant bond, but in the world of organized crime, even distant blood can be turned into a weapon. The revelation that Vince was connected to a Bevilaqua cousin gave him leverage. It meant that he wasn't just another soldier climbing the ladder, he was someone with ties to an older, respected name in the underworld. This connection became the secret card he could play whenever he needed to prove his worth to the bosses. This is where things got interesting. With Dwight in Tulsa, Vince began moving faster. He filled the power vacuum, took over key operations, and started flexing his muscles in ways he never could while Dwight was still around. But Vince didn't just want money or territory, he wanted the throne. He wanted to be the one the bosses turned to, the one feared by allies and enemies alike. To achieve that, he knew he had to make sure Dwight never came back from exile. In Vince's eyes, Dwight's exile wasn't just about Tulsa, it was about opportunity. While Dwight was busy building his empire far away, Vince used his time in New York to plant deeper roots. He made himself indispensable, a man the bosses needed to keep close. Every time Dwight's name came up, Vince was there to remind them that the past should stay buried, that Dwight was better off forgotten in Tulsa. Yet deep down, Vince was never fully at peace. He knew Dwight wasn't the kind of man who simply disappeared. Dwight was a fighter, a survivor, someone who could turn nothing into something powerful. That thought haunted Vince, and it pushed him to strengthen his ties with Bevilaqqua's cousin even further. He didn't just want to sideline Dwight, he wanted to erase him permanently. This ambition, however, came with risks. In the mob world, overreaching can get you killed faster than betrayal. Vince had to walk a thin line, balancing his hunger for power with the need to appear loyal. To the bosses, he played the role of the eager younger member, always ready to serve. But in the shadows, he was preparing for the day when he would no longer serve anyone. He wanted to lead, and with Dwight out of the picture, he believed that day was coming sooner than anyone expected. What Vince didn't realize was that Dwight's exile to Tulsa wasn't weakening him, it was sharpening him. And while Vince plotted in New York, Dwight was rewriting the rules in Tulsa, creating something even the bosses couldn't ignore. The stage was set for a collision, one that would pit Vince's hunger for power against Dwight's fight for survival. For years, the Bevilaqua family name carried weight in the underworld, even when they weren't directly involved in New York's daily power struggles. Their reputation was like a shadow that never disappeared, old money, old blood, and a legacy of violence that had been whispered about for generations. So when the reveal dropped that Vince was tied to the Bevilaqua family through his cousin, everything about the game changed. This wasn't just a personal connection, it was a revelation that shook the balance of power from the ground up. At first, the connection sounded simple. A cousin in the family, another relative who had stayed quiet and off the radar for years. But anyone who understands mob politics knows that no detail is ever small. Blood ties mean loyalty. And in this world, a cousin from a powerful family is more than just a relative, it's a weapon. For Vince, it meant that his rise was no longer just about his ambition. It was backed by the weight of history and tradition. The bosses suddenly had to look at him differently. He wasn't just Vince the climber anymore, he was Vince with Bevilaqua blood. What made this reveal so powerful was the timing. It didn't happen when Dwight was strong and unshakable in New York. It came after Dwight had been exiled to Tulsa. After his reputation had been reduced to whispers, after the bosses thought they had clipped his wings. By introducing Bevilaqqua's cousin at this point, Vince turned what was once a quiet family connection into a banner of legitimacy. Now, every deal he made, every soldier he recruited, and every word he whispered carried the weight of an old family name behind it. For the New York bosses, this was both opportunity and risk. On one hand, a Bevilaqua connection meant strength. Aligning with Vince gave them access to allies, history, and perhaps even new resources. On the other hand, it meant giving Vince more power than they originally intended. Power in the mob is like fire. It warms you when it's under control, but burns everything when it spreads too far. By backing Vince with Bevilaqqua's cousin, the bosses risked creating a figure who could one day challenge their very authority. But here's the part that truly twists the knife. The cousin wasn't just a passive player. He wasn't a silent name in the family tree. He had his own ambitions, his own grudges, and his own reasons for stepping into the spotlight now. With Dwight out of the way, the cousin saw a chance to rewrite the hierarchy in his favor. Through Vince, he could influence the family without being in the direct line of fire. And for Vince, this was perfect because it gave him power while also shielding him. If anyone challenged his rise, Vince could claim it wasn't just him, it was family. It was blood. And in the mob, blood trumps everything. This reveal also explains why Dwight's exile to Tulsa was more than just punishment. It wasn't random. It wasn't just a move to sideline an old soldier. It was a calculated effort to clear the stage for Vince and the Bevilaqua cousin to step forward. By pushing Dwight thousands of miles away, the bosses gave Vince the space to rise without resistance. What they didn't expect, though, was Dwight's ability to build a new kingdom in Tulsa, one that didn't need New York's approval. The cousin reveal doesn't just change Vince's personal story, it sets up a larger clash of families. On one side, you have Dwight building his own empire from the ground up in a city that was supposed to bury him. On the other, you have Vince and Bevilaqqua's cousin weaving old bloodlines and new ambitions into a force that could dominate New York. It's not just about territory anymore, it's about legacy. Which family will control the narrative, the history, and the future of organized crime? And let's not forget, the Bevilaqua family name carries enemies too. Old rivals, forgotten debts, and blood feuds that never truly ended. By stepping into the spotlight now, the cousin risks drawing those shadows back into the fight. Vince may think this connection makes him untouchable, but in reality, it may make him a target in ways he never imagined. Aligning with an old name means inheriting both its power and its baggage. For viewers, this reveal is more than a twist, it's a key. It explains not only why Vince has moved the way he has, but also why Dwight's story in Tulsa feels like destiny rather than punishment. The cousin's presence turns Season 3 into something bigger than a simple power struggle. It becomes a war between past and future, between loyalty to blood and loyalty to chosen allies, and between a man forced into exile and a man who sees that exile as his golden opportunity. Do you want me to now continue with Section 4, why Dwight was sent to Tulsa? Deeper explanation? 4,000 characters where I tie everything together into the larger theme of betrayal, exile, and destiny. On the surface, Dwight's exile to Tulsa looked like a punishment. A quiet way for the bosses to put him out of sight, far from New York, far from the politics of the family. But as Season 3 builds, it becomes clearer that this was never just about discipline. Tulsa was chosen for a reason. And that reason has less to do with Dwight's mistakes and more to do with the fear and jealousy he inspired among those who claimed to be his brothers. Dwight had one fatal flaw in the eyes of the New York bosses. He was too good at what he did. He wasn't just respected. He was trusted. He wasn't just feared. He was admired. Men who worked under him often spoke with loyalty, and men who worked against him thought twice before crossing him. For a crime family that thrives on control, a man like Dwight was both an asset and a threat. His strength couldn't be denied, but it also couldn't be allowed to grow unchecked. Sooner or later, his presence alone could tip the balance of power in ways the bosses didn't want. This is where Vince's whispers began to pay off. The bosses were already uneasy with Dwight's influence. Vince added fuel to that fire, painting Dwight not as a loyal soldier, but as a man who might eventually carve his own throne. He suggested that Dwight's old-school ways made him unpredictable, and that his loyalty to the family wasn't as unshakable as it looked. Piece by piece, he helped convince the bosses that Dwight needed to be removed from the board, but without bloodshed. Because killing Dwight would have sparked outrage. Exiling him, though, that was cleaner. But why Tulsa? Why not some other city where Dwight could be forgotten? The answer lies in strategy. Tulsa was far from New York, yes, but it was also a blank slate. And like Chicago, Miami, or Vegas, it wasn't already locked down by rival families. It was open territory, untouched by the same web of mob politics. By sending Dwight there, the bosses thought they could test two things at once: Dwight's ability to stay loyal when cut off from everything he knew, and Tulsa's potential as a new frontier for the family's operations. In their minds, this was a win-win. If Dwight failed in Tulsa, it would prove Vince right that Dwight was outdated and unfit for modern power. If Dwight succeeded, then the bosses could claim his empire as their own, folding it back into New York under their control. Either way, they believed Dwight would never be a true threat again. Either he would fade into irrelevance, or he would unknowingly build something they could take from him later. What they didn't expect was Dwight's refusal to play by their rules. In Tulsa, Dwight didn't act like a man waiting for permission. He didn't treat his exile as a leash. Instead, he built his own kingdom, loyal not to New York, but to him alone. The crew he formed in Tulsa wasn't bound by old traditions or the politics of the bosses. They were bound by survival, loyalty to Dwight, and the opportunities he gave them. This is what made him dangerous, not the exile, but his ability to turn exile into freedom. Looking back, Dwight's exile feels less like punishment and more like destiny. The bosses thought they were burying him, but they were planting him instead. Tulsa became his soil, and from it, he grew stronger than ever before. While Vince and Bevilaqqua's cousin played their games in New York, Dwight was proving that he didn't need their approval to rise. He could build something new, something untouchable. And here lies the deeper irony. By sending Dwight away, the bosses created the very monster they feared. They gave him the distance he needed to break free from their grip. They gave him the space to build without interference. And in doing so, they ensured that when Dwight returned to the stage, whether to reclaim power in New York or defend what he built in Tulsa, he would be stronger, sharper, and more dangerous than ever. For Dwight, Tulsa wasn't exile. It was rebirth. It was proof that he wasn't just a soldier in someone else's family, he was a king building his own. And for Vince and the Bevilaqua cousin, that's the nightmare they never saw coming. They wanted him gone, forgotten, erased. Instead, they turned him into the one man who could truly challenge their rise. So why was Dwight sent to Tulsa? Because fear and ambition pushed the bosses into believing it was the safest move. Because Vince's ambition demanded Dwight's removal. Because the Bevilaqua cousin needed a clear path into the spotlight. But the truth is, Tulsa was never Dwight's prison. It was his battlefield. And in Season 3, that battlefield is about to explode.